Hey, welcome to our explainer. If you've been paying attention to the news lately, it really feels like the world is fracturing, right? Old alliances seem shaky, new conflicts are popping up everywhere, and the way countries used to work together, well, it feels like a thing of the past. But is that the whole story? Or is something totally new being built from the rubble of the old order? Let's dig in. So let's just jump right in with the biggest question of all. Is global cooperation actually dead? I mean, it's a question you hear everywhere, from Washington to Beijing, and it's pretty easy to see why. The headlines definitely make it seem like we're more divided than ever. But what does the data really tell us?
Look at this number, -20%. It's just stark, and without any context, it's honestly a little alarming. This single number, believe it or not, is the key to understanding this huge shift happening and how the world operates right now.
And here's that context. That 20% drop, that's the measured decline in the old-school, large-scale cooperation between nations, and that's happened just since 2019. This isn't just a feeling people have, it's a fact tracked by the Global Cooperation Barometer. It's telling us that the old model, get every country in a giant room to solve big problems, well, it's just not working anymore. Okay, so that brings us to our first big idea, the fading global order. The whole era of expanding global teamwork that pretty much defined the last 30 years, it's giving way to something new, and frankly, a lot more fractured. So let's take a look at exactly where those cracks are starting to show. Yeah, this decline isn't happening equally everywhere. We're seeing more trade barriers going up, and geopolitical tensions are so high that making those big, sweeping agreements is almost impossible. But the most alarming drop, as the World Economic Forum points out, is in peace and security. Seriously, every metric here, from the number of active conflicts to the number of displaced people, is worse than it was before the pandemic. This is where the old system's failure is the most visible and the most painful.
So, what does this actually mean in the real world? This isn't just some abstract debate for think tanks. It's creating a more divided planet with very real economic friction and, as we're about to see, a absolutely devastating human cost.
A huge driver of this new era is a trend called economic nationalism. The age of laissez-faire, which is just a fancy term for governments keeping their hands off the economy, that's over. Done. Now, governments aren't just the referees, they're star players on the field, actively intervening in markets, protecting their key industries, and cutting very specific transactional deals. And this table right here shows exactly where that friction is boiling over. You've got the tech and trade war between the US and China. You have Europe getting really nervous about China's dominance in green tech, like electric vehicles. And then you have this renewed great power competition heating up in regions like Latin America. These aren't just minor disagreements. They are fundamental clashes of economic strategy. And this is where the consequences become truly devastating. This breakdown of cooperation has a real, tangible human cost. Human Rights Watch points to these catastrophic conflicts where international rules are just being flat out ignored. In Gaza, you see a blockade and attacks on civilian areas. In Sudan, widespread atrocities. In Ukraine, relentless attacks on civilian infrastructure. This quote from Human Rights Watch really just hits you in the gut. It says, "The very rules that were designed to protect civilians in war are fraying." When governments fail to act together, they don't just abandon people to suffering. They weaken the very norms that are supposed to protect all of us, everywhere. Okay, that all sounds pretty bleak, I know, but this is not the end of the story. Cooperation isn't disappearing, it's just changing its shape. And this brings us to the really crucial countertrend. The rise of a whole new way of working together, where many is fast becoming the new multi. So let's just quickly compare these two models. On one hand, you've got traditional multilateralism, these huge groups like the UN, with really broad goals, but they're often incredibly slow to act. But on the other hand, you have this new idea of minilateralism, smaller, way more flexible groups of countries or even companies that team up around specific practical goals. They're agile and they actually get things done. And you can see it working in the data. While that broad cooperation is down, these smaller, focused efforts are delivering real results. Trade in IT goods, up over 5% in 2024. International bandwidth, the digital highways of our world, surged by 25% and is now 4 times larger than it was in 2019. And in climate, smaller groups are finding common ground to get new financial flows moving.
So, what does this actually look like on the ground? Well, it's groups of countries forming alliances to make sure they have the critical minerals they need for their supply chains. It's new investment pouring into trade corridors that connect strategically aligned nations. And it's these really creative public private partnerships, like the Resiliency Consortium, which brings tech companies and governments together, that makes business speed with public sector goals.
But this whole realignment isn't just happening in government offices and corporate boardrooms. There is another massive force reshaping our world, and it's coming from the ground up. Citizen-led movements that are pushing back hard against injustice. And wow, 2024 was a huge year for this. In Bangladesh, student protests literally toppled a repressive leader. In Venezuela, thousands took to the streets to demand a fair vote. In Georgia, citizens protested a drift away from democracy. And get this, in South Korea, mass protests overturned a martial law decree in just 6 hours. It's just a stunning reminder of the power people have when they act together. And as this quote really highlights, these aren't movements led by some out-of-touch elites. They are driven by ordinary people who are just fed up and are using their collective power to demand real change. It's such a crucial reminder that the future isn't only decided in boardrooms or parliaments.
So, we've got a fracturing old order, the rise of these new, flexible alliances, and a powerful push from citizens on the ground. How do we put all this together? Well, it really all boils down to one key idea, what we can call the resilience imperative.
In this era of nonstop disruption, from geopolitical shocks to supply chain crises, the single most important skill is resilience. It's the ability to anticipate, withstand, and adapt to whatever gets thrown at you. The nations, the businesses, and the people who master this skill will thrive. Those who don't, well, they're going to get left behind. So how do you actually build this resilience? Experts point to a pretty clear 3-step framework. First, go on offense. Don't wait around. Proactively find new partners and new opportunities. Second, strengthen your core. Build teams and use technology that's specifically designed for disruption. And third, match the format to the problem. Use those nimble, flexible partnerships we've been talking about. Which brings us right back to where we started. The world isn't really falling apart, it's realigning. Cooperation isn't dead, it's changing its outfit. The old, slow models are fading, and these faster, more agile ones are taking their place. So the real question for all of us, for leaders, for companies, for citizens, isn't whether to work together, it's how. And in this world of constant change, what's our answer going to be?